3 hours. That's how long billionaire Adrian Holt's 6-month-old daughter had been crying at the top of her lungs on the transatlantic flight to London. No nanny, no miracle cure, no solution that worked. First class, usually a sanctuary of silence, had turned into a pressure cooker of frayed tempers and dark glances aimed at seat 2A. Adrian, CEO of Holt Quantum Systems, an $8 billion AI empire, sat stiffly, his face flushed from embarrassment. The custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loose, and sweat had dampened the back of his shirt. In his arms, little Clara arched and wailed, her tiny fists flailing as though reaching for something she couldn't find. He had tried everything. He walked the aisle, rocking her the way he'd seen in parenting books. He changed her diaper in the cramped bathroom until he was breathless. He tried white noise machines, a bottle, even pressing noise-canceling headphones to her ears and playing Mozart. Nothing worked. Clara cried harder, her face scarlet, her lungs tireless. Passengers were beginning to mutter. An elderly man in 1A tapped his cane angrily on the floor. A socialite snapped photos and typed furiously on her phone. Someone behind him said, loud enough for Adrian to hear, "Children don't belong in first class." Every word cut into him like a blade. He was a man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals, calm investors in crisis, charm entire boards of directors. But he couldn't soothe his own daughter. And worse, he couldn't shield her from the judgment pressing in from all sides. 4 more days of meetings in London awaited him. He was supposed to close the largest deal of his career. If he couldn't handle one flight, how would he handle everything that came next? The aircraft felt like a gilded prison. Adrian closed his eyes, took a long breath, bracing himself to endure more hours of humiliation. And then it happened. A slight figure rose from the economy cabin. It was a boy, maybe 14, maybe younger, thin, wiry, dressed in a worn hoodie, jeans faded nearly white at the knees, sneakers scuffed to gray. On his back hung a patched-up backpack, stitched and taped so many times it was more scar than fabric. Colorful math competition patches clung to it like medals on an old soldier's coat. He walked slowly toward first class, each step measured, like someone forcing himself to cross an invisible line. He stopped in front of Adrian's seat, lifted his chin, and met Adrian's exhausted eyes. "Sir," the boy said softly, but his voice carried through the noise like a clear bell. "Would you let me try?" Adrian froze. Under normal circumstances, he might have refused. A stranger, a child from economy, asking to hold the daughter of one of the most powerful men in tech? It sounded absurd, but Adrian was too tired to summon pride or caution. He nodded. The boy extended his arms. He took Clara with a calm, practiced motion, as though he'd been doing this all his life. The cabin went silent. 200 passengers held their breath, watching this boy rock the billionaire's screaming baby. And then, impossibly, the crying stopped. Clara went still, blinking up at the boy with wide, wet eyes. Her breathing slowed, her fists unclenched. He pressed gentle points along her back, rhythmic and sure, and hummed a lullaby, a low, mournful tune that seemed to belong to some older, quieter world. 3 hours of wailing, undone in minutes. The cabin, which had been an arena of barely suppressed frustration, turned into a cathedral of quiet. The old man lowered his cane. The socialite put her phone away. Even the flight attendant stood frozen, smiling as though they'd just witnessed a miracle. Adrian stared at the boy. "Where did you learn to do that?" The boy's smile was small and tinged with sadness. "My little brother had colic. It took me months to figure out what worked." The answer landed like a stone in Adrian's chest. He saw it now. the grief in the boy's eyes, the weight of nights spent awake, the stubborn strength of someone who had fought too hard, too young. "What's your name?" Adrian asked. "Malik Evans." "And where are you headed?" "London. I'm the youngest competitor at the International Youth Mathematics Invitational. If I win, I get a full scholarship to MIT. Malik spoke it plainly, like it was less a dream and more a mission he had sworn to carry out. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Something was shifting inside him. This wasn't just a kid in a hoodie. This was a survivor, a prodigy carrying the dreams of an entire neighborhood, stepping into a world that barely believed he belonged. When Clara finally drifted off to sleep in Malik's arms, Adrian made a decision that surprised even himself. He gestured to the flight attendant. "Give him the empty seat next to me," he said quietly. Malik sat down carefully, still cradling Clara as though she were made of glass. Adrian leaned back, for the first time in hours breathing without panic. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this small, improbable decision, would set both of them on a path that would change their lives forever. The aircraft glided through the night sky, engines humming like a low hymn. Adrian closed his eyes and felt something like peace settle over him. Malik looked out the window at the scattered ship lights in the black ocean below, lights that looked like stars, and felt the first glimmer that maybe, just maybe, his own story was about to turn. When the wheels finally touched down at Heathrow, Adrian felt as though he'd survived a battle rather than a flight, but Clara was still asleep, breathing softly in Malik's arms. It felt like a truce had been signed, and the boy sitting next to him was the reason. As the seatbelt sign went off, Adrian turned to Malik. "Walk with me," he said quietly. The boy nodded, clutching his backpack as carefully as he'd held the baby. Together they joined the stream of passengers heading down the jet bridge. Adrian noticed the looks they drew. A billionaire in a wrinkled suit, a sleeping baby, and a thin teenager in patched clothes walking side by side. Outside the gate, Adrian stopped near a quiet corner. He wasn't a man who usually hesitated, but something about Malik made him slow down, choose his words carefully. "You were remarkable back there," Adrian said. "I have to ask, where did you learn all of that?" Malik shrugged, eyes lowered. "I didn't have a choice. My little brother Caleb cried like that every night for a year. We couldn't afford specialists. My mom worked double shifts at the hospital. If I didn't figure out how to calm him, no one slept. I spent months reading library books, watching videos, trying everything until something worked." Adrian saw it now. Not just skill, but the quiet resilience of someone forged by necessity. "Where's your brother now?" Malik's voice was flat. "He passed away last winter. Stomach infection." The words hit Adrian like cold metal. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. This boy had just given him 3 hours of peace, and yet carried a grief far heavier than any seatmate should have to bear. Adrian cleared his throat. "You said you're competing in a math tournament?" Malik nodded. "International Youth Mathematics Invitational. They only take the top 12 from the country. I'm the youngest. If I win, MIT covers tuition and housing. If I don't..." He let the thought trail off. Adrian didn't need him to finish. The stakes were clear. The chauffeur was waiting outside with a black Mercedes, holding a sign that read, "Holt." Adrian gestured for Malik to follow. Inside the car, London rushed past. Gray sky, wet streets, double-decker buses. But Adrian barely saw it. He was thinking. "You know," he said finally, "I have 5 days of back-to-back meetings here. I can't exactly take Clara into boardrooms with me, and after what I saw on that plane, I trust you more than any professional nanny I could hire on short notice." Malik blinked. "You trust me?" "Yes." Adrian's tone was decisive now. "I'd like to hire you to care for Clara during my meetings. I'll pay you £500 a day, give you a room next to mine, and make sure you get to the competition on time." Malik stared at him. £500 a day was more than his mother made in a week. It could cover a month of rent, maybe two. But then he thought about the tournament, about the hours of preparation still ahead of him. "I appreciate it, sir, but the competition, it's everything to me. I can't lose focus." Adrian studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then we'll make sure you don't. My meetings run 10 to 4. You'll have evenings and mornings free. When Clara naps, you can study. I'm not asking you to choose between your dream and this job. I'm offering both." Malik hesitated. The image of his mother at the kitchen table last month flashed in his mind, her hands covering her face as she looked at the hospital bills. He thought of Caleb's small grave, the promise he'd made silently that night to make something of himself for his brother's sake. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." Adrian smiled. Not the polished boardroom smile he used with investors, but something warmer. "Good. Then let's get you settled." The Langham Hotel lobby glowed like something out of another universe. Marble floors, gold accents, a crystal chandelier hanging like a frozen waterfall above them. Malik froze for half a second before following Adrian to the reception desk. "Mr. Holt," the manager said, beaming, "your suite is ready, and we have prepared the adjoining room as requested." Malik followed them up to the top floor. When Adrian opened the door to his suite, Malik nearly stopped breathing. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of London at dusk, streetlights flickering on like stars below. The living room was larger than his family's entire apartment back in Chicago. Adrian pointed to a side door. "That's your room. You'll have your own bathroom, desk, and 24-hour room service. Study as much as you need." Malik stepped inside. The bed looked impossibly soft. The bathroom gleamed with marble and gold fixtures. For a long moment, he just stood there, backpack still on his shoulders, unable to believe that this was where he'd sleep tonight. He sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the backpack drop. Inside were 2 pairs of clothes, a calculator, and a battered notebook full of equations. On the inside cover was a photo of Caleb, smiling through missing baby teeth. Malik placed the photo carefully on the nightstand. "This is for you," he whispered. Outside, Adrian was feeding Clara a bottle by the window, watching the boy's silhouette through the open door. He recognized something rare in Malik, the same fire that had once driven him when he was just a factory worker's son with one shot at college. For the first time since his wife's surgery, Adrian felt that this trip to London might turn out to be more than just business. London woke to a sky the color of steel. The city smelled of rain and ambition, a scent Malik had never known before. Breakfast had been delivered to the suite at dawn. Adrian was already on a video call with investors in Tokyo, speaking in the clipped, precise tone of a man used to commanding entire rooms. Malik sat across the table, carefully flipping through his notebook while Clara gurgled happily in a high chair beside him, stacking blocks into a precarious tower. When the call ended, Adrian closed his laptop. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Nervous," Malik admitted, "but ready." "Good," Adrian said, his voice gentler than Malik expected. "Nerves mean you care. That's how you know you're about to do something important." An hour later, the chauffeur dropped Malik at the Royal Institution, a building that looked more like a temple than a science venue. Its stone columns rose like solemn guardians. Inside, the main hall buzzed with energy, the air thick with the sound of dozens of languages, the shuffle of papers, the clicks of expensive calculators. Malik hesitated for a heartbeat, clutching his patched backpack. Around him were competitors from 60 countries, some wearing school blazers embroidered with crests, others in pressed shirts and ties. Many looked older, 17, maybe 18, their confidence worn like armor. Malik felt suddenly very young. As he signed in, he caught fragments of conversation. "Who's the kid?" a boy from Germany whispered. "The American team brought a middle schooler?" someone else said, half laughing. "He won't last past the first round." Malik's ears burned, but he said nothing. Words wouldn't prove anything. Numbers would. The opening ceremony began. Dr. Margaret Thompson, the competition director, stepped onto the stage. Her voice rang out like a church bell. "Welcome to the 47th International Youth Mathematics Invitational. You are the brightest minds of your generation. Over the next 3 days, you will face problems designed not just to test your calculation skills, but your creativity, logic, and your ability to see patterns where others see chaos. Solve not just for the answer, but for the truth." The first round began. Individual problem solving. Each competitor sat alone at a long table, a booklet of problems placed face down before them. The clock started. Malik turned the first page, and his pulse steadied. Number theory, his strongest area. Within minutes, patterns unfolded in his mind like doors swinging open. He scribbled furiously, each solution sharp, precise, almost elegant. One problem involved designing an algorithm to optimize the distribution of medical supplies during an outbreak. Malik's pencil slowed. He thought of Caleb, of nights spent waiting in emergency rooms, of doctors saying they didn't have enough resources. He wrote with renewed focus, determined to make the solution perfect, as if solving the problem here might solve it for kids like his brother everywhere. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the scratch of pencils and the occasional sigh of frustration. When the proctors called time, Malik set his pencil down with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. He walked outside into the drizzle, where Adrian was waiting with Clara bundled in a soft blanket. "How did it go?" Adrian asked. Malik hesitated. "I think I did well, but some of them, they're really good." Adrian crouched until they were eye level. "Let me tell you something," he said quietly. "When I was 22, I stood in front of a room of venture capitalists who had been in business longer than I'd been alive. I was terrified, but I reminded myself they had invited me because I had something they needed. It's the same with you. You're not here by accident, Malik. You earned this seat. Trust that." Malik nodded slowly, feeling the words settle somewhere deep in his chest. Back at the hotel, Malik spent the evening studying while Clara napped. He turned the floor into a miniature classroom, lining up her blocks into sequences. 2 red blocks, 4 blue blocks, 6 yellow, he said softly. "What comes next?" Clara giggled and reached for a green block. Somehow, impossibly, she had chosen the right one. Malik grinned. "You're going to be a mathematician too," he whispered. That night, before bed, Malik sat by the window overlooking the city lights and opened his notebook to a fresh page. He wrote out one problem from memory, the medical supply optimization, and reworked it until it felt absolutely right. He didn't just want to pass this competition, he wanted to honor his brother's memory with every solution he gave. The next morning would bring round 2, team problem solving. Malik knew he would have to prove himself not just to the judges, but to older competitors who doubted he belonged. But tonight, with the quiet hum of London below and Clara breathing softly in the next room, Malik felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just hope, but belonging. Morning rain glazed the streets of London as Malik stepped out of the black Mercedes, heart thudding. Today would not be about solitary genius. Today, He would have to prove he could hold his ground among three of the best young mathematicians in the world. Inside the Royal Institution, competitors gathered in clusters, their badges sorted into teams of 4. Malik scanned the board for his name. Team Sigma. Kenji Tanaka. Japan. Sophia Klein. Germany. Lucas Ramos. Brazil. Malik Evans, USA. He approached the table assigned to them, trying to ignore the nervous heat in his palms. Kenji was already there, tall and sharp-featured, his blazer pressed to perfection. Sophia, blonde and precise, scribbled formulas in a notebook with ruthless speed. Lucas leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the table with casual confidence. "You're the American?" Kenji asked without looking up. "Yes," Malik said quietly. "You're younger than I expected," Sophia added, glancing at him briefly before returning to her notes. Lucas smirked. "Don't worry, kid. Just try to keep up." The first challenge appeared on the screen at the front of the room. Design an algorithm to optimize traffic flow in a major metropolitan city, accounting for population growth, weather variables, and emergency vehicle priority. Sophia immediately began writing differential equations, filling half a page before Malik had even uncapped his pen. Kenji drew network diagrams with crisp efficiency. Lucas suggested a probability model for accident distribution. Malik stayed quiet, absorbing everything. This was how it had always been. Walking into a room where everyone assumed he didn't belong, waiting for the moment he could prove them wrong. "Do you have anything to add?" Sophia asked, impatience edging her voice. "Yes," Malik said, finally speaking. "You're modeling traffic as if drivers are perfect agents who follow the shortest path algorithm. But in real cities, human behavior is irrational. People choose routes based on habit, fear of certain neighborhoods, even superstition. If we don't model that, our solution will fail in practice." Kenji's pen stopped. "You're saying we should weight the network based on behavioral probabilities?" "Exactly," Malik said, his voice gaining strength. "And we should simulate real-time congestion feedback, like adaptive signaling, so emergency routes remain clear even under load. That's how Chicago manages ambulances in rush hour." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Chicago, huh? You've studied this?" "I've lived it," Malik said simply. "When my brother got sick, the ambulance almost didn't make it through traffic. I know what happens when the math doesn't match the reality." There was a beat of silence. Then Kenji nodded slowly. "He's right. We can incorporate stochastic variables for human choice." Sophia, reluctantly impressed, began revising her equations. Lucas stopped smirking and leaned in. "Okay, kid, show us how to weight the network." For the next 2 hours, Malik worked like a conductor in front of an orchestra. He sketched ideas on the whiteboard, blending Sophia's equations with Kenji's network graphs, adjusting Lucas's probability curves. Slowly, the solution took shape. Not just elegant on paper, but practical, robust, alive. When time was called, Team Sigma submitted their model with just seconds to spare. Later that afternoon, the results were posted. Team Sigma had placed second overall in the first collaborative round, missing first place by less than a point. Sophia turned to Malik, her cool composure softened. "I underestimated you," she admitted. "Your behavioral weighting saved our solution." Kenji bowed slightly. "You saw a dimension we missed. That is rare." Lucas grinned. "Guess you're not just here for the free trip, kid." Malik allowed himself a small smile. For the first time since stepping off the plane, he felt he had earned his place, not just as the youngest competitor, but as a teammate who could lead when it mattered. That evening, back at the Langham, Adrian listened to Malik's story while feeding Clara her dinner. So they doubted you at first? Adrian asked. Yes, Malik said, sitting cross-legged on the floor, still scribbling in his notebook. But by the end, they were listening. Not because I shouted the loudest, because the math worked. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Business isn't so different. People will doubt you, until you give them something undeniable. Malik looked up, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Tomorrow's the last round, the hardest problems. And you're ready, Adrian said with quiet certainty. I've seen how you think, Malik. You don't just solve problems. You find the cracks where everyone else stops looking. Malik turned back to his notebook. Somewhere deep inside, the weight of Caleb's memory pressed against him, steady and grounding. Tomorrow would not just be another round. It would be the test of everything he had become. London was glowing that night. Wet streets reflecting amber light, buses rumbling through puddles, a city that never quite slept. In the suite, Adrian was reviewing slides for the next morning's board meeting while Malik quietly reworked a combinatorics proof at the desk. Clara slept peacefully in the crib between them, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Then, without warning, the rhythm changed. Malik was the first to notice. He froze, pencil in midair. Mr. Holt, she's breathing faster. Adrian dropped the remote and rushed over. Clara's face was flushed, her skin hot to the touch. She's burning up, Adrian said, panic sharpening his voice. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead, then grabbed the hotel phone. I need the doctor on call, now! The next minutes blurred. A hotel medic arrived, checked Clara's temperature, 39.5 degrees Celsius, and recommended immediate transfer to St. Mary's Hospital. Adrian's face drained of color. I'll come with you, Malik said. You don't have to. I do. The chauffeur drove them through the rain-slick streets, hazard lights flashing. Malik held Clara in the back seat, keeping her upright, gently pressing points along her back the way he had on the plane. Her cries softened, but the heat radiating from her skin terrified him. Adrian sat rigid, fists clenched on his knees. I should have brought another nanny, he muttered, half to himself. I should have stayed in New York. What am I even doing dragging her across the ocean? Malik looked up from Clara, meeting Adrian's eyes. You're doing your best, he said quietly. That's what matters. For a moment, Adrian just stared at him. This 14-year-old boy with a patched backpack who somehow carried the calm of someone twice his age. At the hospital, nurses rushed Clara into the pediatric ward. Adrian signed forms with shaking hands. Malik stayed close, whispering soft reassurances to the baby. The fever began to break after medication and fluids, but they were told she'd need to stay overnight for observation. At 2 a.m., when the ward had gone quiet and the adrenaline began to fade, Adrian slumped into a chair outside the room. Malik sat beside him, shoulders hunched, but eyes still alert. She's going to be fine, Malik said softly. Adrian nodded, rubbing his temples. I wish I had your certainty. Malik hesitated, then said, When my brother got sick, I used to sit in waiting rooms like this all night. I learned that panic doesn't help anyone. What helps is showing up, staying there, even when you're scared. Adrian turned to him. You really loved him. Malik nodded, swallowing hard. He was only 2 when he died. I promised him that I'd get out, that I'd make something of myself so my mom and sisters wouldn't have to go through that again. Adrian felt something shift inside. He saw now that Malik wasn't just competing for a scholarship. He was carrying a whole family's hope, a whole neighborhood's investment, a vow to someone who could no longer speak for himself. You know, Adrian said slowly, when I was your age, my father was laid off from the factory. We had nothing. If someone hadn't given me a scholarship, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Holt Quantum wouldn't exist. Sometimes I think about that. How one decision, one open door can change everything. Malik glanced at him. Maybe this is one of those doors. For the first time all night, Adrian smiled. Maybe it is. By morning, Clara's fever had broken. She was asleep, cheeks pale but peaceful. Adrian stood by her bed, shoulders finally relaxing. I have a meeting in 4 hours, he said, glancing at his watch. But nothing tonight will matter more than this moment. Malik stood beside him, exhausted but steady. You should go rest. I'll stay with her. Adrian looked at him, this boy who had been a stranger just 2 days ago, and nodded. When they finally returned to the hotel later that morning, London was waking up. Malik collapsed into bed for a short rest before the final round of competition. Adrian stood by the window, holding Clara and watching the boy sleep. Something had changed between them during the night. Adrian no longer saw Malik as just a mathematical prodigy or a convenient helper. He saw him as a partner, someone who, in his own quiet way, had already saved them both. The morning of the final round dawned pale and sharp, London washed clean by night rain. Malik stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his hotel room, hoodie zipped, patched backpack slung over one shoulder. His reflection stared back at him, dark circles under his eyes, but something fierce burning behind them. Today would decide everything. Adrian was waiting by the breakfast table, Clara asleep against his chest, her fever completely gone. She's a fighter, Adrian said, smiling down at his daughter. Like someone else I know. Malik grinned faintly. I'm ready. I believe you are. Adrian handed him a fresh notebook and pen. Bring back something unforgettable. The Royal Institution was quieter that day, the chatter muted by the weight of what was about to happen. Only 20 finalists remained. They filed into a hall lined with portraits of scientists whose discoveries had altered the course of history. Faraday, Maxwell, Curie, as though the walls themselves were watching. Each student was assigned a single problem, open-ended, designed not just to measure skill, but to measure vision. Malik turned his paper over. Design a mathematical model capable of predicting and preventing the spread of infectious disease in densely populated urban areas. Your model must include epidemiological factors, network transmission patterns, and resource allocation under crisis conditions. Present a solution framework with justifications. For a moment, Malik just stared. This wasn't just a problem. This was his problem. He saw his neighborhood in Chicago, overcrowded apartment blocks where infections spread fast. He saw Caleb's pale face in the hospital bed, the ambulance that almost didn't arrive in time. He saw every kid in his block whose parents couldn't afford a doctor. And then he started to write. He drew the city as a graph, intersections as nodes, streets as weighted edges. He layered probability distributions for human contact, then infection rates. He introduced a time-evolving function to simulate how fear changes human behavior, people staying home, skipping work, clustering in smaller groups. But Malik didn't stop at prediction. He built an allocation algorithm for limited resources, vaccines, medical staff, ambulance routes, using linear programming to minimize mortality across neighborhoods. He found himself whispering under his breath as he worked, as though speaking to Caleb. This is how we save them next time. This is how we win. 2 hours passed, then 3. The room smelled faintly of ink and sweat. Competitors shifted in their chairs, some frowning, some staring blankly at empty pages. Malik kept writing, diagrams filling his notebook like constellations. When the final bell rang, he put down his pen with a quiet, exhausted certainty. As the competitors filed out, Malik stepped into the gray London afternoon and found Adrian waiting by the gates. How do you feel? Adrian asked. Malik thought about it for a moment. Like I left everything on that desk. Good, Adrian said. That's the only way greatness ever happens. Back at the hotel, Malik collapsed into a chair, too tired to study, too wired to sleep. Adrian poured him a glass of water and set it down. You know, Adrian said, watching you these past few days has reminded me of something. I used to think genius was about raw intellect, IQ scores, perfect memory, lightning-fast calculation, but that's not what I've seen in you. Malik looked up, curious. You don't just solve problems, Adrian continued. You take pain and turn it into equations. You find patterns inside chaos. You see people where others just see numbers. That's not just mathematics, Malik. That's leadership. Malik felt heat rise to his face. No one had ever said words like that to him. That evening, as London lit up outside the windows, Malik opened his notebook again. Not to study, just to look at what he had created. For the first time, he didn't see pages of desperate scrawl. He saw a map of hope. Tomorrow would bring the results. He didn't know if he had won, but he knew he had given the world his very best attempt at an answer, and that, in itself, felt like a kind of victory. The hall was silent except for the faint rustle of programs and the crackle of the microphone being tested. Malik sat in the third row, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles ached. Around him, competitors from 60 countries sat in their neat rows, jackets pressed, shoes polished, every one of them waiting for their name to be called, or not called at all. The stage was bathed in golden light. Behind the podium, banners hung with the words, International Youth Mathematics Invitational Closing Ceremony. Adrian stood at the back of the hall, Clara balanced on his arm. The baby's fever was gone, her cheeks still pink, her hair a soft halo under the lights. She clapped her tiny hands as if she knew something important was about to happen. Dr. Margaret Thompson, the competition director, stepped to the microphone. Her voice was calm, measured, but Malik could hear the suspense beneath it. This year's competition, she said, has been among the most challenging in our history. The problems were designed to push the limits of mathematical creativity and human resilience, and this year's competitors rose to meet that challenge. Malik's heart pounded. In third place, Dr. Thompson continued, representing Germany, Sophia Klein. Applause broke out. Sophia walked to the stage with the elegance of someone who had been preparing for this moment her whole life. Malik clapped too, genuinely proud of her. In second place, Dr. Thompson said, representing Japan, Kenji Tanaka. Kenji bowed before walking to the stage, his face calm but his eyes shining with pride. Malik's heart hammered in his chest. There was only one name left. And in first place, Dr. Thompson said, pausing just long enough for the entire hall to hold its breath, the winner of this year's International Youth Mathematics Invitational, representing the United States of America, Malik Evans. For a second, Malik didn't move. The words seemed to hang in the air as though he wasn't sure they were meant for him. Then the hall erupted in applause. Malik stood, legs shaking, and began to walk toward the stage. The golden light felt impossibly bright, the sound of clapping like waves crashing in his ears. Somewhere in the back of the hall, Clara let out a happy squeal, and Adrian's proud smile was visible even through the blur of Malik's tears. Dr. Thompson handed him the trophy, heavy, gleaming, engraved with his name. Mr. Evans, she said warmly, your work this week was extraordinary, not just mathematically rigorous, but visionary. You reminded us all that mathematics is not just about numbers. It is about saving lives. Malik took the microphone with trembling hands. Thank you, he said, voice catching. I didn't think I'd be standing here. Where I come from, people don't usually get chances like this. My community raised money for my plane ticket with bake sales and car washes. My mom works nights so I could have books to read. I want to dedicate this win to them, and to my little brother Caleb. This is for him. The hall went quiet for a moment. Then the applause rose again, louder, wilder, as if every person in the room understood what it meant for a boy from Chicago's South Side to be standing on that stage. When Malik stepped off, Adrian was waiting near the aisle. He shifted Clara to one arm and extended the other to Malik. "You did it," Adrian said simply. Malik couldn't speak. He just nodded, gripping the trophy so hard his knuckles turned white. As they walked back toward the car, Malik glanced at the glass trophy, the London night reflected in its surface. For the first time since Caleb's death, he felt not just grief, but victory. Back at the Langham, Adrian ordered room service, not champagne but sparkling cider, and they toasted at the table while Clara played with the edge of the tablecloth. "You know," Adrian said, raising his glass, "I've seen a lot of winners in my life. Some I've invested in, some I've competed against. But what you did here, Malik, that's different. You didn't just win a competition. You proved that pain can be turned into brilliance." Malik smiled faintly, still cradling the trophy in his lap. "I just wanted to solve the problem right." "And you did," Adrian said. "But maybe your real solution wasn't just on that paper." Malik looked at him, puzzled. "You reminded everyone in that room why we do what we do," Adrian said softly. "You reminded me." Outside the windows, London glowed like a constellation. Malik leaned back, exhausted but at peace. Tomorrow he would have to think about what came next. MIT, scholarships, the future Adrian hinted at. But tonight, for one brief, perfect moment, the world felt solved. London had settled into night. The suite at the Langham was quiet except for the low hum of the city beyond the windows. Clara slept in her crib, one tiny hand curled against her cheek. Malik sat at the dining table, trophy beside him, still too overwhelmed to put it away. Adrian poured himself a glass of water, then sat across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that comes after a battle when both soldiers know they have survived. "You know," Adrian said at last, "I've spent my entire life chasing numbers. Quarterly earnings, market share, acquisition deals. I thought that was what mattered most. But tonight, standing in that hall, I realized something." Malik looked up, waiting. "You reminded me of myself," Adrian said quietly. "When I was your age, I was desperate to prove I belonged in rooms where no one believed I did. I worked harder, fought harder because I thought the only way to be seen was to be perfect." Malik nodded slowly. He knew that feeling well. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I don't want you to have to fight alone the way I did. I want to give you the things no one gave me." Malik frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Adrian said, his voice steady now, "that regardless of scholarships, regardless of competitions, the Holt Foundation will cover every cost of your education. MIT, graduate school, research grants, whatever you need. And when you're ready, there will be a place waiting for you at Holt Quantum Systems, not as an intern fetching coffee, but as a partner leading a new division I want to create." Malik's breath caught. "What kind of division?" "One that uses AI and advanced mathematics to solve real social problems," Adrian said. "Resource allocation, healthcare access, education systems, things that actually change lives, things that might have saved your brother." Malik's throat tightened. He glanced toward the crib, at Clara sleeping peacefully. This child he had soothed at 35,000 feet, whose cries had led to everything that had followed. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Adrian said gently, "and then say thank you to yourself for being brave enough to get up from that seat on the plane." Malik hesitated. "It feels like charity, like I didn't earn it." Adrian shook his head. "No. This isn't charity. This is investment. I've spent my career betting on ideas that could change the future. Tonight, I'm betting on you." Malik was quiet for a long time. He thought of his mother, counting bills at the kitchen table, of his grandmother, whispering prayers for his safety, of Caleb, whose short life had become the compass for everything Malik did. "If I say yes," Malik said slowly, "I want to use it to give back, not just to my family, to every kid in my neighborhood who thinks math is a locked door. I want to open it for them." Adrian smiled, and this time it wasn't the smile of a CEO. It was the smile of a man who understood exactly what that promise meant. "Then we have a deal." They shook hands across the table. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like signing a treaty between two worlds, the world Malik came from and the one Adrian had spent decades building. Clara stirred in her sleep and let out a soft sigh, as if approving the agreement. Malik sat back, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. "This doesn't feel real." "It will," Adrian said, standing and heading toward the crib. "Tomorrow you'll wake up, and the world will still be waiting. But you'll never walk into it the same way again." Malik looked at the trophy gleaming in the lamplight, then at the man who had just changed his life. For the first time since boarding that plane in Chicago, he allowed himself to believe that the future was not just something that happened to him. It was something he could shape. Morning light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Langham suite, warm and golden after days of gray. Malik stood at the crib, gently rocking Clara back to sleep after her early bottle. Her tiny fingers closed around one of his, holding tight even in dreams. Behind him, Adrian was tying his tie, preparing for the final day of negotiations with the London board. "You're good with her," Adrian said softly. Malik shrugged, though pride flickered in his eyes. "She likes patterns. Babies notice more than we think." Adrian smiled faintly, watching the boy for a long moment before speaking again. "You know, I wasn't always the man in the suit." Malik turned, curious. "I grew up in Detroit," Adrian said. "My father worked in a factory that built transmissions. My mother cleaned offices at night. There were winters when we couldn't pay the heating bill and I'd do my homework wearing gloves." Malik listened in silence. "When I got a scholarship to the University of Michigan, I almost didn't take it. I didn't believe I belonged there." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection solemn in the mirror. "But there was a professor, old, gruff, brilliant, who looked me straight in the eye and said, 'If you walk away, you're not just letting yourself down. You're closing a door for every kid who comes after you.' That's the only reason I stayed." Malik nodded slowly. "So you had a mentor too?" "Yes," Adrian said. "And I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd be that door for someone else." He looked directly at Malik. "I think you might be that someone." The words landed with the weight of a vow. Later that morning, Malik walked with Adrian through the hotel lobby toward the waiting car. Guests and staff turned their heads. A billionaire CEO, his baby, and a boy with a patched backpack, an unlikely trio but somehow perfectly matched. At the boardroom, Adrian handed Clara to the head of hotel childcare staff and knelt to speak to Malik eye to eye. "Study if you want, rest if you need. When I get back tonight, we'll talk about the future." Malik nodded, heart hammering. Back in the suite, he spread his notes across the table but found he couldn't focus. He walked to the window and looked out over London, a city that had tested him, stretched him, given him something he didn't know he was missing. He pulled Caleb's photo from his notebook and set it on the sill. "We did it," he whispered. "But this isn't the end." That evening, Adrian returned, visibly exhausted, but smiling. "The deal is done," he said, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "London will be our European headquarters. And now, we talk about yours." Malik sat across from him, bracing himself. Adrian didn't rush. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "When I was in those meetings today, all I could think about was what comes next. Not just for my company, but for you. For kids like you. Malik, you don't just deserve a scholarship. You deserve a whole future built to match your potential." Malik's throat tightened. "That's what I want too. But I want it to mean something." Adrian nodded. "Then we'll make it mean something." The city outside glowed, the Thames winding like a silver ribbon under the night sky. Malik felt as though the world had tilted, as though the impossible was suddenly possible. Not just MIT, not just a degree, but a path where his pain could become purpose. For the first time since he had stepped onto the plane in Chicago, Malik didn't just feel like a boy chasing a dream. He felt like the beginning of a story bigger than himself. The plane touched down in New York beneath a clear blue sky, the kind that seemed to stretch all the way to tomorrow. Malik pressed his forehead to the window and watched the skyline grow sharp against the horizon. It was the same city he had left a week ago, but he was not the same boy. At baggage claim, Adrian shifted Clara to one arm and rested his free hand on Malik's shoulder. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Malik nodded, clutching his trophy. "It feels different now." The next day, Holt Quantum Systems held a press conference at their Manhattan headquarters. Reporters packed the atrium, cameras flashing as Adrian stepped to the podium. Malik stood to the side, nervous but steady, wearing the same patched backpack that had carried him across the ocean. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian began, "today we announce not just a milestone for Holt Quantum's European expansion, but something more important. This is Malik Evans." Every camera turned toward him. "He is 14 years old," Adrian continued, "and last week he became the youngest champion in the history of the International Youth Mathematics Invitational. But that is not why we are here. We are here because Malik reminded me what this company was built for, solving the problems that others say cannot be solved." The crowd murmured, impressed. "Through the Holt Foundation, we will fully sponsor Malik's education, MIT, graduate school, as far as he wants to go, and when he's ready, he will lead a new division dedicated to using mathematics and artificial intelligence to address global social challenges, education, healthcare, and access to resources." The room erupted in applause. Malik felt heat rise to his face, but also something steadier. Pride, yes, but also responsibility. When the conference ended, Adrian led Malik outside into the bright afternoon. Reporters called after them, cameras clicking, but Adrian didn't rush. "You've just been handed a future most people can only dream of," Adrian said. Malik nodded. "I want to earn it every day." "You will," Adrian said. They reached the car. Adrian handed Clara to Malik for a moment while he spoke to the driver. Clara looked up at Malik with wide, curious eyes, then giggled and grabbed at the trophy in his other hand. Malik laughed softly. "Easy, Clara. This one's heavy." In that instant, Malik understood that the story wasn't really about a competition, or even about a scholarship. It was about this moment. A boy from Chicago holding the daughter of a billionaire, standing at the edge of a future neither of them could have imagined when the plane first left the runway. As the car pulled away, Malik looked out at the city, at the endless streets stretching ahead like equations waiting to be solved. He thought of his mother, his grandmother, his brother's grave. He thought of every kid back home who had been told to sit down, stay quiet, stop dreaming. And he whispered, almost to himself, "We're just getting started." Inside the car, Adrian glanced at him and smiled as though he'd heard. The skyline rose ahead, gleaming like a promise. Somewhere deep inside, Malik felt the same thing he had felt when Clara first stopped crying on that airplane. That life's hardest problems could be solved, if someone was brave enough to try. Thank you for staying with us until the last moment of this story. Sometimes, one small act of courage, like standing up on a plane, can open doors we never knew existed. If this story moved you, take a moment to breathe it in. And if you'd like to hear more stories of hope and quiet genius, we'd be honored to have you subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.